What's happening, y'all? Christopher Griffith here, and I have a good friend of mine and a very, very accurate, I would say, projector of economics and economic circumstance that I've followed now for quite a while on here as well. And his name is Logan Mohtashami.
It's great to be
Say it
here.
again. Have everyone else. If you're watching it, say Mohtashami. Perfect.
Mohtashami.
Perfect. Well, Logan, thank you for taking some time out of your day regularly, what you're doing, forecasting and discussing economics, the housing industry, and the change that's just kind of always occurring. I think that all of our audience here, from what I've seen, have experienced to some degree markets that are pretty nuts. I mean, you certainly understand. In places where it's becoming increasingly difficult to find properties, they have tons of fear of the unknown, like the interest rate stuff and the Fed. And we try to talk to them about some of those things regularly as well. But from the rate movement to the market movement to is it a bubble to everything, fear, as you well know, because you are the best, my favorite troll, if I'm just being honest, you use data to troll the people that are trying to manipulate fear to get clicks because it's ridiculous. And so our goal here today, and what I want everyone watching along to understand at this point, is we want to encounter some of those fears that are going on. We want to discuss them, the data behind them, and the data that leads to kind of at least a rough understanding of what could be occurring next, even if there's a few options. So that said, Logan, give us kind of a lay of the land right now. Tell us from your perspective, like, where are we? What's going on, man?
Well, a lot of my work is demographically based. So in the previous expansion from 2008 to 2019, and I've always separated my housing work into two different segments. The previous expansion had the weakest housing recovery ever. When we talk about recovery, we're talking about mortgage debt expansion, new home sales, and housing starts. However, the second part of a lot of my economic work is that years 2020 to 2024 would have the best housing demographic patch ever recorded in history. And if you follow the long-term downtrend in the 10-year yield since 1981, if you actually follow the long-term downtrend in rates for 800 years, we're going to head lower. And the problem, though, of having the best housing demographics ever, the lowest mortgage rates ever, is that home price growth can really take off because inventory levels have the risk of breaking to all-time new lows.
So
and that's occurred.
Pause real quick. Best demographics for some of the slower bunches of us in the audience. What do you mean when you say demographics in 20 to 24? And like, what do you talk to me about that?
So years 2020 to 2024 is a once in a lifetime event for the US economy. Ages 28 to 34 currently are the biggest in US history. So when you look at when people buy homes, it was much older than it was, for the baby boomers. Goes with this concept: Americans, they rent, they date, they mate, they get married. 3.5 years after marriage, they have kids. Years 2020 to 2024 would have the biggest housing demographic patch ever recorded in history. Then you add move-up buyers, move-down buyers, cash buyers, investors. Here you go. This is a once-in-a-lifetime 5-year event for the U.S. So housing demand will be very stable during this period of time. But there's the downside to that, is that inventory levels can drop much lower than what we saw from 2008 to 2019. So everything in a sense kind of looks right because housing authentically broke out in February of 2020, right before COVID hit us.
Awesome. Well, so I think I've followed you for a while, and I think that, estimating how many people are going to be buying houses by when they were born and when they're likely to buy is probably pretty sound reasoning. But I think I've seen something too that's been different, at least in my lifetime. I don't know that I've ever seen as many corporations and as many foreign investors coming into the U.S. housing market and buying in the volumes that they're purchasing in currently. And I'm not like that's on top of the best demographic that creates, the shortcomings. So talk to me a little bit about, our domestic demand based off of those, demographics as you discussed. And then what else is out there and how that is like, and kind of compare and contrast them as far as volume maybe or something. Give us a feel for it.
Well, I always thought the investor story got overblown because to me, if you look at sales to investors, they actually were higher in the previous expansion. If you look at cash buyers, they actually were higher in the previous expansion because a lot of the cash buying after the housing crash were distressed sales. They buy them just to flip them right away. Over the years, that number has actually fallen down. We've had a recent uptick from kind of a 15 to 17% range to about 18 to 22. It's not that big of a story. And the reason I say that is that people think like there's a Wall Street moat around housing. It isn't. A really good example is from 2011 to 2017. People made a deal that Wall Street was buying homes. They bought like 200,000 homes out of like 48 million that were bought. So context is key. Mom and pop investors have always been bigger in the last decade than what they were traditionally. So that is a viable a reality. But you're looking still at 16 to 22%. Mortgage buyers are always the primary driver of housing. When they fade, so does housing fade. So they are part of the total buying discussion that I have each year, but it's always going to be driven by mortgage buyers, by primary mortgage buyers. And what you have is, you have the biggest, youngest demographic patch ever. Then you have people move up and they move down every year. You add them together. That's why existing home sales are higher now than what they were in the previous expansion. And we're not talking about like a massive sales boom compared to the previous expansion. I'm going to give you a good example. In 2020, 300,000 more homes were bought in the existing home sales market. Some of that was spillover into 2021. So you're talking about 800,000 more homes bought in 2021 than in 2019. So it isn't like the market of 2002 to 2005, where we saw a massive credit boom in housing, and then we saw constant sales growing, and then the housing crash. It's much different this time. You have, to me, the best loan profile homeowners ever recorded in U.S. history. We're talking about fixed low debt costs versus rising wages, nested equity on top. Cash flows are excellent, but that's also a problem because people stay in their homes longer, and it's taken inventory levels to an area where it's always been my biggest concern about this 5-year period, that inventory levels break and unhealthy home price grow, because homeowners are here to stay. They buy, they live in their house 10, 15, 20 years. They're not turnovering their house. Like from 1985 to 2007, it was like 5 years housing tenure. From 2008 to 2022, 10, 11, and some data lines, it's 15, 16 years. I've been in my house for 17 years. So it's a much different type of housing market than, let's say, the market of 2002 to 2011.
Gotcha. People are staying in their homes longer for whatever reason, but we also know, as far as we've considered, right, we've reached a really high point in our value, kind of one where we were targeting quicker than we thought. But where do we go? What do we end up in versus this, considering what we're spending? And I think, does that impact the consideration or the longer tenure that you're talking about?
Here's another problem. A lot of people have nested equity. Like, we have more equity in our house than ever in history. So a lot of people, why don't people sell? Well, where are they going to go? This is not a stock. When you sell a stock, you can do whatever you want with the money. When you sell your house, you're either homeless, you're renting, or you're buying another property. So
to underlie the significance of actually owning and having a house.
Yeah.
Even though you have the money of the house. So the house is valuable.
The question is invalid in the sense that people don't understand, why don't people just sell and live on the streets and have their money? No. When you live in a house, housing is the cost of shelter to your own capacity to own a debt, right? It's not an investment. You buy it for shelter cost. Homeowners have it as good as ever right now. So they need a reason to move. So job loss, divorce, a bigger family, smaller family, whatever it is, it's not creating the inventory. And I think a good example, and this is something I've talked about for a while now, when we go back to 2018, 5% mortgage rates didn't really budge the total inventory level for the existing home sales market. It impacted the new home sales market, but for the existing home sales market, inventory didn't really move too much. For 8 years now, from 2014, if you look at total inventory levels from 2014, they've been slowly falling down. The one other data line that's been rising is mortgage purchase application data has been rising since 2014. So naturally, if you get any pickup in demand, and in years 2020 to 2024, we should see a little bit more demand from home buyers. It just draws the inventory level lower. And now people are going, well, even if I sell my home, am I going to get the home I want? I mean, we started 2022 at fresh new all-time lows. And let me give you a great example. I live in Southern California. There's a lot of people who live here. There was less than 7,000 homes for sale at the start of the year here for Los Angeles County, Orange County, and San Diego County combined. That's why I've always said in the beginning of 2021, everyone needs to worry about home prices taking off. The whole forbearance crash bro things, that's a marketing gimmick from some of the most untalented Americans we've ever had in history. That's just grifting out here. Here, it's basic demographic economics, household formation, debt payments. All these things are leading you to a very unhealthy home price growth stage. And that's where we are right now currently.
Awesome. But to point out to y'all that came on, we talked a little bit about as far as the types of buyers, right? Individuals like you and I buying a house to live in because that's the nature of us, or for an investment into a good and strong, healthy housing market, or corporate investment domestically here. Proportionally, it's still where we want it, or where it's good to see, which is homeowners are the primary buyers of homes that drive the market.
Yeah, foreign buyers are less than 300,000 homes of the homes purchased every year out of like near 6.8 million.
You see all these articles. So I think for me too, I naturally wonder, you don't know, there's so many people talking about different angles, whether it's BlackRock or whomever else, corporate wise, or Zillow iBuyer type models, even if they're not meant to maintain holding those property for a long time. So I think it's at least important to kind of give you an opportunity to put that sucker on a T-ball and knock it over.
The iBuyers are so small that they don't even make up 1% of total home sales. So like one of the grifting tactics last year is that the Fannie Mae survey like broke to an all-time low in like the middle of the year last year. So everybody said housing is finished. Nobody wants to buy a home. It's all FOMO. It's all
Gary Vee came out and he said the American dream of home ownership is dead. And I trolled him.
It was such nonsense. I've always said the housing crash addicts in America are the worst pathetic trolling people in history.
They're like the tabloids, right? The tabloids of news.
I label them the lost decade. They're housing bubble boys that turned to forbearance crash bros. Now the grift this year is, all investors and Americans are going to sell their homes at a 25-35% discount to get out because they're all going to rush to the door. This has been here for a very long time. This is not economics. These are not data people. And the easiest way you can tell people are trolling, ask any troll what their existing home sales forecast is. Nobody does it because these people don't forecast anything. They're designed to create clicks, and it works, right? It works. I mean, part of my job has always been to show you these are not very talented people because they've been wrong for 10 years. They don't care. They just want attention. That's the whole model. So I give them credit. They are really prolific American bearish trolls, the worst talented economic people we have, but that is by design. Right. So you have to look at people's economic models and forecasts and put them all together. Then you get something to work with. But if you're just going to say housing is going to crash, American says, look what happened in the last 10 years. All those crash articles since 2012, the housing bubble boys have said home prices have to come back down to 2012 levels. That is more than a 105% decline in home prices in 1 year. They're gone. It's finished. It's over.
I think it disrespects the nature of transition to more of a feasible, long-term, better debt structured economy, like in a lot of different ways that everyone whines about and like, oh, it's the D word. Don't use it. It's terrifying. Is debt a scary thing to you, Logan?
The best homeowner loan profile in history are all American homeowners because their debt payments as a percentage of incomes all-time lows. Their household debt payments as a percentage of incomes are all-time lows. Their nested equity on top of the debt they have are at all-time highs. It will never look this good unless mortgage rates go below 2% and we have another wave of refinancing. This is why I've stressed credit work, so much over the last 7-8 years, especially through COVID. I mean, how confident was I in the summer of 2020 for HousingWire calling these group of people the forbearance crash bros, a bunch of professionally untalented men running around on YouTube. Clubhouse was the worst.
Twitter, were they calling you the bear or something?
Yeah, just like saying forbearance was going to crash the market.
Bear killer.
When demand was stable, it's like what? It doesn't work that way.
No, and you do. And one of the things, just for any of y'all watching here, I know you hear us talking about data and you're like, yeah, but y'all are just talking. One of the things I'm going to ask Logan to do after this live is I want him, we're going to bring him into the community for a little bit. And the same way I've watched him do, if you're on Twitter, follow Logan on Twitter. There's no one better. Look at the way he trolls people with data, with plats to describe and show and articulate his opinions and his reasonings, because it's exceptional and it's very easy for even a crayon eater to follow along to. So one of the things that we're going to do here is below the live. Logan, I want to have you come in and make some of these cases with some of the charts that I know you have. I don't know where you like, I like data and I have a few charts. I don't know where you keep them all, but I know that you can make and paint a very quick picture, as you do with me in private dialogue at different times as well.
Well, here's the thing. There's the Fred website and the federal debt actually shows you positive cash flow data. So one of the data lines that I've shown over the years is that FICO scores for mortgage origination has always been more positive, but that's only half the story. The biggest mistake I thought the American Bears have made for 10 years is that they didn't understand that loans now post 2010, and I think anybody in the mortgage industry knows this, there are 30-year fixed products. There's no recast rate risk. There's no 80-20 stated IO products. None of that is here. So what has happened is that from 2005 to 2008, credit card bankruptcies, foreclosures, loans that were in stress were rising 2005, 2006, 2007, and 2008. Then the job loss recession happened. None of that was happening from 2010 to 2022. Delinquencies were going down, bankruptcies were going down, foreclosures were going down, and all of these homeowners, and we have to remember 40% plus of homes in America have no mortgage. All of these homeowners over that 10-year period, which was the longest economic and job expansion in history, when they refinanced their debt, their wages have been rising for years. So here on paper, their cash flow looks better. And then what happened with, during the COVID crisis, all these homeowners just refinanced again. Forbearance was near 5 million. It's down to under 800,000. More people are getting off. People stay in their homes to live in. They have sex. Their kids go to school. It's just shelter. And on paper, there's no time in history that we could even compare this to. They look so much better on paper now. FICO scores, debt payments, everything. And then on top of all that, they have so much nested equity on there. So it's simple when you break it down to that and just look at what happened from like 2002 to 2005. We saw a big credit boom. And then from 2005 to 2008, sales were declining and bankruptcies and foreclosures were rising. None of that's happening. Never has. Reading is a good thing, right? The people who don't read and then say, oh, everything's going to crash. Look what happened to them. It's an embarrassment. This is like the biggest trolling people in history. And they lost and they can't take it back. That's why I say it's a lost decade. Like for the rest of their lives, they were the people that were saying housing was going to crash in 2018 and 19. And oh, here comes COVID and forbearance. And now the grift is everyone's going to sell their home at the same time and housing is going to collapse. It doesn't work that way. A seller is a natural buyer.
Perfect. Love it. And I think that now is a very good point for all of you that are on here and you haven't been on here since the very beginning. We've been spending maybe 20 minutes now discussing the current health of the market with considering in hindsight now the most recent years and what everything looks like from sentiment to data to demand to need, all of those things, even kind of discussing inflation to a point. But Logan, if you had to give the state of housing a health grade for now and its immediate future based off of blood test or whatever else, the way that you view it, what kind of a health grade would you give it overall right now?
And here comes the complicated part of housing. Since the summer of 2020, being afraid of inventory crashing to all-time lows and demand staying stable, this is the most unhealthiest housing market post 2010. Not because there's a credit boom or a bubble or anything. It's just that homeowners look really good on paper and they're not moving as much. And demand is stable enough to keep days on market too low. That's my thing, is that days on market is basically at a teenager level. That is not a healthy area to be in. So for what I've done for my work for HousingWire, I give people targets to where we want to get back to a normal balanced housing market. And that is between 1.52 million to 1.93 million total inventory from the NAR's data. That's kind of 2018 to 2019 levels. Days on market will be over 30. That's a more balanced market. What we have right now is chaos just because inventory is too low. Demand is too stable. That's what you don't want. And again, that's the biggest fear of years 2020 to 2024, this 5-year period, that inventory is not able to break out just back to 2018-19 levels, which is still historically low, but that was a more balanced market. So I'm rooting for more inventory just to create
home buyers, your home builders. You're rooting for home builders to catch up, but they're all, I think, a little shell shocked from the last time when they were trying to catch up and get where they needed to be, right? And what they took, and lost there.
Okay, so this is another interesting aspect of housing economics, which I've never agreed with my economic friends on. When we built all those homes from 1996 to 2005, did home prices level off? No. When we built all these homes, right, from 2010 to 2022, where permits are at pre-cycle highs right now, have home prices leveled off? No. The only thing that has created more inventory post 1996, and the reason I use 1996 as my breaking point is that's when mortgage rates made another leg lower. The civilian workforce just grew a lot more. So the only time that we've ever had like more than 6 months supply of inventory is from 2006 to 2011. That was demand collapse. That was a credit bubble with forced selling. It's actually really rare in America to have over 6 months supply. People forgot about that because they all fall back to 2002 to 2005 mode. And on Twitter, and a lot of the charts I use for HousingWire, tons of charts I put on HousingWire, you can see I always reflect back to this is not the market of 2002 to 2005. So demand was never booming or a sales credit boom. It's just enough to keep inventory low. And it just grew in 2020 and 2021. And we just took another leg lower. So that's part of the problem, is that demand is stable. It's not booming, and inventory levels have cracked to an unhealthy level, and housing starts isn't going to do anything, right? There's no way because the builders do not ever oversupply a market. That's not their job. That's not their business model. In fact, if you actually look what's happened in the last 2 years, what's going on here? We're humans, right? We do whatever we can to make our lives better. So the builders are, hey, lumber costs, labor costs, material costs, everything, we're going to push it to the consumer. Why? They have pricing power. They can do it because they can sell their homes and make money. So they can eat any cost that they've hit. Home sellers right now, go to your Instagram page. Guess what? High fiving. Yeah, I got 65 offers, 100,000 over asking. Yay. That's not the best thing for housing economics, right? Because what's happening is you're doing forced bidding, and what's happening is the acceleration of price growth is kicking up. So it's getting harder.
It's a runaway train. You're talking about, it sounds to me like you're talking about a runaway train that you don't see home builders being able to get in front of. It sounds like it's just going to scale up and drive price.
The only thing that ever creates balance for housing is higher rates. And this is why since last year, I'm rooting for higher rates, but I'm also understand the limits of what the bond market can do to us. Like a good example is before COVID happened, it said the 10-year yield is going to be between negative 21 basis points and 62 basis points. When we're above 62 basis points, we're out of the recession. The America's Back recovery model that I wrote for HousingWire on April 7th, 2020, I said by the end of 2020, we should get the 10-year yield to 1%. Then in 2021, even with this fast recovery and everything, I said it's going to be very difficult to get the 10-year yield above 1.94%. Now, the one difference in 2022 than the last previous years is that I said there is a way to get the 10-year yield above 1.94% and mortgage rates above 4%. Mortgage rates between 4 to 5% hopefully just creates more days on market. It did it in 2013 and 14. It did it in 2018 and 19. That creates balance. Nothing. Sub 4% mortgage rates are too low.
So to break that down Barney style, for all of you that are like, oh my God, interest rates at 4%, it's the highest it's been in my life, which is very short and doesn't consider where it's high. That's not a scary thing. It's a healthy thing, and it's not going to take or rob you. It's actually probably going to prevent some difficult things that you'll have to face later. So it's a now or later kind of a concept.
So in 2018, when we had 5% mortgage rates and people thought housing was crashing, we had 6 million total home sales. 6 million, right?
Crazy.
I mean, existing home sales at the worst levels of the housing crash was like 3.45 million, right? So the 5% mortgage rates didn't collapse housing. But what it does is that it's the mechanism to create more days on the market to cool things down. This is not like 2008 to 2019. We never had an inventory crisis, no matter what anyone says. There was enough supply and demand to keep things at least at bay. It's different now. So higher rates for me, and hence why I'm giddy, is that it's the only thing that could create balance, because the only other way you do this is credit controls. We're not a country that does credit controls. So, and then there would be a big fuss about it that only the rich could buy homes. So that's not even part of the equation. The builders aren't ever going to oversupply. So we have to find balance somehow. And the fear is that, do rates even get high enough, long enough to create some kind of balance? Because the demographics are here. That's not changing.
It's a
Right?
very strong buyer pack that's coming through. They're all waiting in the chow line. They all got to eat, right? The demographics are there.
Yeah. So that's, the demographics are already set. It's the mortgage rate. And still 2022, what do we have this week? Fresh new all-time lows in inventory, right? So inventory seasonally picks up always in the spring and summer. It fades in the fall and winter. So always remember that. All these trolling people, they say, oh, look, inventory is increasing. It increases all the time in the spring and summer, and then it fades in the fall and winter. What we don't want is 2023 to start at fresh new all-time lows, because then you're really getting into like the utter chaos of housing, to the point where I think they would start doing emergency meetings to do something to try to get inventory up, because this is not what you want. You don't want to see your Instagram friends with 31 bids and 66 bids and this continuing on and on. Higher rates are the only thing that could create balance. We need a balanced marketplace because the demographics aren't changing anytime soon.
I really appreciate you hammering down that point, because so many people are fearful of where rates have moved to, a very slight adjustment, right? And not even the highest it's been in the last 10 years at all. They're fearful of what that means to them, when actually that means a good thing to them. If they want to buy a house, it means that they may have an opportunity to get an offer accepted, or actually walk through the house and have a homeowner's inspection without having to wave their left leg and promise it, and at closing type of thing. So I appreciate you hammering that home. Anything else to nail that one to bed?
Well, just know that it's very difficult for us to even get over 5% mortgage rates. That would mean we've broken the long-term downtrend. So when we're focusing about rates now, just look at it in two different factors. Japan and Germany's 10-year yields have taken off. That's the number one thing I needed to see, 4% plus mortgage rates in 2022. So if economic data stays firm and global yields can still rise, we can get 4 to 4.5% rates, or stay around here long enough to create some days on market. However, if the rate of growth of the economy slows down, which it's going to happen just because we grew too fast, the rate of growth of inflation falls, most likely bond yields go back down. And if there's not enough inventory, guess what? We're back at it again. And that's my fear. It's funny.
A chain grass fire that they don't.
Opposite fear of everything. I'm worried about rates going back down, and then here we are, and then we start 2023 at
So
fresh.
that's a good point, because we were on with a friend of mine named Hammer Helmer on here the other day. He talks about mortgage bond movements kind of weekly for the community, to give them an idea of what's going on and teach them a little bit about the process. But I told him, I thought, like, reading everything that's out there, and I just take it in and consume it. I'm not manifesting ideas over here, reasonings like your own. But my fear was that there isn't enough reaction by the Fed to cause things to be sure to get there. They miss on slowing down the chain reaction they need to. Inflation still does what it's going to do, and the demographic does also. And then we're all kind of hosed, and the only hope you have is that you're riding a big asset.
Here's the thing. My 2022 forecast for rates to go above 4% had nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve tightening things can take economic data down, and bond yields will go down with it. Global yields, I targeted Japan and Germany. If people go look at Japan and Germany's 10-year yields, it has been dead for years. If they can break out, which they have, they can get rates higher. The problem is we've been in a downtrend in rates, in bonds for 4 decades. It's really 800 years. And there's nothing really, to me, because we're not a fast growing economy. Eventually the growth is going to slow down. Eventually the rate of growth of inflation is going to fade. The world is an aging population nation. Supply chains, everything starts to get back to normal. Some of those things come down. If it brings rates down again, it's just hard, because remember, inventory has been falling since 2014. 2014 was the last time we saw total inventory grow a little bit. That year, purchase application data adjusting to populations were the lowest ever. We had 20% negative year-over-year growth declines, and we still had over 5 million total home sales. So you have to people have to start looking at housing. Is that we have 330 million people. We have 32.5 million Americans ages 28 to 34. Every year, millions and millions of people buy homes, regardless. They bought more homes during the pandemic, right? Because it's a demographic push. They weren't afraid of buying homes. They needed shelter. So the shelter cost with all these people, you can see what's happening. We've driven inventory to all-time lows and rates are low. Don't make it any more complicated than that. We
Oh, I'm
need
going to, though, because we had a great question that came in. I'm going to click the button because I think it'll even pull it up here. Boom. How would potential foreign conflict, here we go, Ukraine, Taiwan, maybe, I don't know, conflict affect the current housing market?
Well, we've had 2 days where the Russia attack was going to happen. It's driven bond yields lower twice. And then when it seems like nothing's going to happen, bond yields have gone up. That's still a short-term thing. Oil prices can maybe have a melted heat up if there's a conflict there. But eventually in time, the supply and demand in some of the inflationary data balances itself out. And then that data line is going to fall. And typically when that falls and growth falls, bond yields go lower with it. So my concern is that we don't stay high enough to create more days on market, because we're none of these countries, we have inflation data like in Japan and some of these other countries that can't create inflation if their life depended on it. So this is eventually in time, everything starts to get back to normal. And another question I get is that people say, well, if the Fed stops buying bonds and mortgage-backed securities, rates could go up to 6, 7, 8. No, let's go back in history. 2010, we've had multiple times where the Fed stopped buying. QE1 ended, bond yields went lower, mortgage rates went lower. QE2 ended, bond yields went lower, mortgage rates went lower. When the taper was happening in 2014, during the last few months, guess what happened? Bond rates went lower, mortgage rates went lower. When QE3 ended, that was supposed to be the end of the world. Bond yields went lower, mortgage rates went lower. Follow that downtrend in a 10-year yield, work off of that, and then it can make sense. Because think about it today. We have the hottest economic growth in decades. We have the hottest inflation data in decades. We have a very hawkish Fed, and the 10-year yield is what? 2.04% or whatever it is at this very second. If I took you back to 1999 yourself and told you, hey, the 10-year yield's at 2%, people would go, what global depression are we in when yields are so low? So trend is your friend. Trend has always been your friend here. There are times where bond yields go up, rates go up. There are times where they go down. But the trend has always been lower for longer. And some of the things that create that is the demand for our bonds are so much. And one of the reasons why I targeted Japan and Germany is that we need those yields to go up, because for us to break over 1.94%, we need some of the global yields to go up, and negative yields have fallen. That was a must. But it's just difficult to have a reversal of the last 4 decades, even the last 800 years.
I love that point too, because I think a lot of people, when they're buying in an already a cost elevated market because of demand, demographics, all of those things that we've discussed, and they have no really firm understanding of what could happen with rates, they see them going up and they hear all the horror stories, the fear stories that tabloids are pushing and claiming it's actual analysis, right, with nothing behind it. And they wonder and worry, what happens if I end up with this big asset, this big house with a big price, and then rates go crazy and I need to refinance or I need to do those things. And so I think it's good to point out long-term projection and estimation, by your opinion, is that they'll continue to do what they have for 4 decades.
Yes. And one thing about the fear out there, we just had one of the biggest world global shocks in history, and more people bought homes with mortgages in 2020 than any single year from 2008 to 2019. Why? Because home buyers are ball players. They are ready to go because they're buying just the payment. So I know there's this hype on fear, but if you look at general housing demand data, pretty much it looks kind of normal. If there was no COVID right now, if there's no fear of everything, people would have, said, oh, it's a really normal market. Demographic trends picked up, so more home buyers. If there was a time where fear would have overtaken home buyers, we saw that pause during COVID about 6 weeks, and then it shot right back up.
And it was emotional. It wasn't based off of anything other than their emotion about the circumstance they're in. But I do think that there's an impact here, because in places in towns like mine, Pottsboro, 1,800 people, in small places close or adjacent to larger markets, we have seen it. We have people moving in from guys like Nate from Washington to Pottsboro, right? And this kind of a sprawl, urban to rural to small towns is happening in a different way that they're feeling, I think.
And that has been a big part of my work in the previous expansion. No COVID, no work from home model. I thought that would be the case. Anyway, because again, I always do the same
Technology,
math.
because
Yeah.
technology.
Well, not only just technology, when you rent, when you date, when you mate, when you get married, you have kids, you tend not to live in expensive areas. You move to the suburbs or anywhere that's more affordable because you need a bigger house. So even without COVID or work from home, this would have been the case to a degree. Now you work the work from home model and COVID. There's appeal to certain areas of the U.S.
It
that's
was a
cheaper.
catalyst. It drove it faster, but it wasn't like it wasn't going to happen already.
It was going to happen regardless. Why? Because when people get married and they have kids, they buy something bigger. They don't live in apartments and condos. That's how it's been, for since the Peloponnesian War, right? So it's just there's a certain style of behavior that comes with home buying, and usually you go to a bigger place, and that goes farther east. I know here in Southern California, everything's cheaper every 10 miles you go east. So that makes sense. That's common just because of the demographic patch. So in some ways, everything looks normal, and in some ways, because of the chaos of COVID and the work from home, and all these other factors, it's a very chaotic time in that sense too.
Oh, I love this one here. It says, Texas here. Whoever you are there, Mr. or Mrs. Texan, it's good to see you here. Texas here. Would you buy now with higher prices and lower rates, or wait for the higher rates, lower prices? In North Texas, we are seeing sold out new construction and multiple offers on used. And so this is a really good point. One of our moderators is an agent in the North Texas market, just on the northern side of, I would say, the Dallas metro. And they have a home builder there that has a list of 700 people waiting for these new homes. So I think it's a valid question, but I'll let you tackle it, obviously.
So when people ask me, should I buy a house? I have the same answer always. You're not ready. I always tell people this: you're not ready to buy a house. If you're asking me to give you permission or talk about to buy a house, you're not ready. Why are all these millions of homeowners buying every day? They're ready. They're buying a payment. There's no more exotic loan debts or anything like that that could facilitate you overspending or buying something that's too big. You're buying a payment, the cost of shelter. So I always say when people ask me that, you're not ready to buy. And then people get, hey, you don't know me. I said, no, listen, ask me if you should have sex with your spouse. You're not going to do that, right? When you're ready, you guys are ready to go at it. Here, it's a home buy. Millions of people buy homes every year. Why? Because they're ready. They're buying a payment. They're buying a shelter payment. So if you're worried about prices or anything like that, I don't think you're ready, because every sense of data that we've had for 2 or 3 decades, it always shows a serious amount of buyers every single year based on demographic profiles. And right now, they're all kicking in. So if you're trying to maybe time a market or anything like that, listen, those buyers don't care. They're all going for their homes, right? It's like that Hungry Hippo games in the 1980s, except there's only like one ball out there and everybody's fighting for it. That's why I say it's a very unhealthy market, because we simply don't have, because people need shelter, and you're buying that payment. When you buy that payment, it's a 30-year fixed product for the most part. You're likely to
So I
save.
think that's what really their question's getting at, though, is weighing the payment cost differential of impact of price or rate in that circumstance. And that's easy enough to model out, but do it in your own. But
it's a personal choice that, to be honest, the millions of Americans that buy every single year, they don't care what you or any of us are doing. They're buying that house. And unfortunately, the stuff that we're seeing right now, people just paying 100 to 150,000, all people want is somewhere to live. That's it. They see these cheap payments. I mean, the cost of debt is so low if you compare it to even 2008 levels, the total payment. So people go, why are all these Americans buying homes? The prices are so high. The payment is not that high yet. If the payment was too high, you would see sales fall, inventory rise. So obviously the people are there, and we just don't have enough supply.
Well, and unfortunately, I think that question where it misses is it supposes only 2 circumstances, which neither of those has Logan really projected at all just yet. I mean, in anything that you've said, I haven't heard you forecast a model that says there's a massive price reduction for the cost of housing and shelter and owning it coming.
Yeah, before we even talk about price declines in any meaningful way, we got to get inventory back to 2019, 2018 levels. That's why I've set that target, like 18 months ago, because the concern is inventory stays lower. Now, the problem is you have to deal with the forbearance crash bros and just have to light those people up in the biggest fashion in history. Look what happened. Not only did housing not crash, home prices accelerated in 2021. The exact opposite in the biggest fashion ever recorded in history happened. That should tell you something about how talented these people are. And then what's happening in 2022? We just started the year with fresh all-time lows. So go back in history, look at 2014 levels. Inventory has been falling. The only thing that could create more supply or more days on market is higher rates. That would be the most positive thing, because I know millions of people want to buy a home, right? They just don't want to bid. And this is the main thing about the Fannie Mae survey, why it's broken to all-time lows. What else is broken to all-time lows? Inventory. Nobody wants competition. I mean, selling your house and buying another one is already stressful enough. You have to now, if I sell my home, boy, I've got 30 bidders here, 40 on this house. It's the worst buying conditions I've ever seen, just because inventory is so low. So it's just a stressful time in that regard, just because this is much different than the housing bubble credit boom and then the crash. This is a simple raw shortage of housing. Think we have 330 million people in America out here, and the total inventory that the NAR had was 920,000 to start the year, right? So look at it in that perspective, and you can see why I was concerned in the summer of 2020 and 2021 about home prices taking off and inventory drawing down.
Perfect. So if I'm ready to buy a house, I know I want to buy a house. I need to buy a house. My wife keeps reminding me we need to buy a house. And my only concern is financially, is it better to hedge and rent for a hair longer and buy later into an unknown circumstance? Like, if that's my only concern, squash the concern, not the biggest reason to be worried about the thing that you've already known that you need to do.
You're buying a payment. So if you have to rent, and oddly enough, this was the secondary factor of my work early in 2021 when I talked to the Washington Post and said, hey, listen, you guys all better get ready, because rent inflation is about to take off too. When you have the biggest demographic patches ever recorded, demographics equal demand, now you have to find rent, and rent inflation is picked up, especially in a lot of areas of the US, 10, 15, 20, 25%. Nobody cares about you waiting. Everyone needs shelter, right? And this is what happens, right? This is the big fear about years 2020 and 2020. It's not just home buying, it's shelter inflation for rent.
Yeah. And it's going to hit everywhere.
And that's the thing, is that people have to look at themselves in the mirror and just say, why are millions of Americans buying homes each year? They're buying a payment. That payment is the cost of shelter.
And if you're out there renting, don't be one of these people that denigrate landlords because their cost to buy the thing that you need them to rent to you because you're afraid or not ready or suited to buy a thing that you have to have, which is shelter. Don't be upset because rental prices have to rise, because the cost of creating that rental has as well. And all of the same metrics that you're considering when you decide not to buy and rent instead. The only difference is when you rent, how long are you fixing that shelter cost? And what are you getting in return for fixing that shelter cost? What don't you get in the same time? And that's really the root question that you need to be asking and considering yourselves.
And one thing about shelter inflation, rental inflation, not on home buying, is that when wage growth really picks up, especially on the low end, rent inflation really picks up. And this is why early in 2021, when I told the Washington Post, I said, listen, core inflation is about to get over 2% faster than anyone thinks, and it could stay higher, because when wage growth picks up, landlords get higher rent. That inflation kicks up. So that's the thing about shelter inflation on the rental side. People had been worried about, well, everyone's going to, all of a sudden, become homeless, because no, everyone had money, right? We plugged the holes. Everyone had money. Most people are working right now. Job openings are near 11 million. Jobless claims are near levels that we saw in 1969. Everyone is working. So what's the primary payment you typically have? It's your shelter cost. So either you're buying a home, you have a fixed cost, or you're renting, your rent's going to go up. Either way, you have to live somewhere. And the problem is we got a lot of people doing this area and not a lot of inventory. So it's a very stressful time in that regards. I really feel sympathetic for home buyers, because nobody's ever dealt with inventory levels being this low, with the population being this high, and it's a fight out there.
We got one more question I want to throw up here real quick. I probably came from a professional. If I had to guess, we're posting this in a couple different communities so that everyone, as all of our content, really we designed to be consumable, hopefully by as many as possible. But for some of those senior retired vets that are out there, spouses of vets, and they're considering buying a second home or something along those lines, the question is, why did Fannie and Freddie add the second home hits to the pricing on mortgage rates and bonds?
The second home purchasing has really taken off, just from comparing it to 2018 and 2019 levels. And they just wanted that market to cool down a little bit. Now, on a percentage scale versus total sales, it's not that big, but versus the trend sales that we've seen in second homes, they just wanted to cool the market down. This is a version of what we call as credit controls. Is credit controls where you up the pricing, so the cost, so you try to lower the demand because it gets a little bit out of hand. You're not going to see that really in a big fashion for conventional loans. And I was a loan officer, and since 2003, our family's been in banking since the late 1950s. So I understand the pricing hits. That was really in response to the second home demand, but also I think Freddie and Fannie want to funnel more money into affordable housing. So probably in the next few months, you're going to see some pricing cuts for affordable housing programs. So those are the two factors you have to look at: the increase in pricings for second homes or high balance loans, and then the secondary factors. They're probably going to see some cuts coming into some other programs going out. That to me is probably the main reason why they did this.
Awesome. I think that I enjoyed hearing that answer. I don't know about y'all, and I'm not for sure how this impacts each one of you that have been popping on here. We've covered a lot, and we've been on here for a little bit, so we're not going to just stick around and chat for a ton longer. One thing I want to get real clear and on record with a direct question, because I enjoy your forecasting models. So, Logan, you look into your crystal or brass balls that you see the future in there, whatever it is. What do you see for the next 12 months?
Housing demand so far, the start of the year, is stable. Looking to the purchase application data, which is very seasonal. You want to look at it second week of January to the first week of May, and then after May, total volumes fall. So my line in the sand for years 2020 to 2024 is that we should have at least 6.2 million total home sales, new and existing together, each of these years. So far, it's looking like that. I am hoping that higher rates just create more days on the market, because we just broke to new fresh all-time lows this week. Again, in inventory, and spring is coming. Ages 25 and up, you're looking at sub 4% unemployment rates with 4% mortgage rates. That's not the best environment for having inventory really increase. So days on the market will be a positive. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm rooting for. And it's just, again, it's a very frustrating time. I totally get it, because nobody wanted to talk about demographics getting better in years 2020 to 2024.
Not nobody. You were. I remember.
Yeah, but it's easier to say housing's going to crash. The key point is economics done right should be terribly boring. And you always want to be the detective, not the troll. This is why data people are different than grifters. And the final thing is, remember, all American bears have failed since 1790. Don't join that group.
Don't be betting against America. I think all of the veterans are going to appreciate hearing that sentiment come from you, Logan, specifically. And I think a lot of them, and I want to give this kind of before we part, but I know a lot of y'all want to follow some of the discussion that's happening. Logan puts a massive amount of content out there regularly in a couple different forms, from written form to audio form. We'll talk about those in a second. But what do I tell you? Because I'm scuttlebutt. Scuttlebutt's here's how it really works. Logan's on Twitter. He's on Instagram. He's on Facebook. You know how we met? I was following his stuff, and I started asking questions and then telling him what I thought. And he would correct me and post a chart to prove his point. And man, you really learn. Social media gives you access to people that do a thing and that don't. It's not a huge deal to respond in chat and explain something. It's the nature of what they do. So follow Logan on Twitter or Instagram. He's not really on Facebook a whole lot anymore, which sucks for me. That's where I'm at all the time.
Facebook is gone for me. Instagram, I do Insta stories every day. We go over every single data line that's out there, not just housing, but everything. My job primarily is to show you economic cycles, expansions, and recessions, how to get there, the pathway to get to the future. HousingWire is all my work is there. HW Plus, you get access to everything. Every Monday, Sarah Wheeler and myself, we do a podcast called The Rundown. So we go over all the data that's open to the public. Twitter, you can see all the charts of me going after my trolling housing crash people friends all the time. But Instagram, you could find it, and the stories area there's videos each day to go over the economic data, where my job is just to kind of explain things. So that would be the best avenue. And then HousingWire, HW Plus has everything, all the charts, every data, everything going back to the start of COVID, the recovery model, everything going out. Because again, the correct people are here to show you the pathway and models, how to get there. The crash people know that's just for clicks, right? So economics done right should be boring. I will be your boring, nerdy friend.
I love it. Logan, I appreciate everything. Thank you for coming on here. You have in the past. I'm certainly going to ask you to again in the future. I'm not for sure in what regular rhythm. Hopefully, if y'all watch this today, comment your thoughts. Give us some feedback here, because if you haven't tried to figure out, guys like Logan, us here at Vetted VA, what we want to do is inform you and give you insight source so that you can see, reason, and choose a thing that ultimately only you can choose. And that's the point of everything with the people that I surround myself with, the people that we have talked to here about different things. And I'm certain we're going to have you talk to the community a couple more times this year at the very least. I'd like to be doing it a little more frequent than that, because everyone's worried, man, and I don't get it. I don't get it. Other than being worried about it's going to just
listen. In April of 2020, when everybody went crazy bearish, I wrote the recovery model on April 7th for HousingWire, predicated on the recovery happening in 2020. And just the same theme as always. What's going to be on my tombstone is all American bears have failed since 1790. If you want to join that graveyard, go ahead. You're going to lose.
I love that. I love that statement. Don't bet against America. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey, you said a couple things today that made me think about adding another thing to a shirt like this, actually, like a fifth thing, the mating.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I've got a picture with the screen in the backyard saying that same thing. All American bears failed. I tweet it all the time.
Love it. Well, Logan, thanks for your time today. As always, thanks for the content that you put out there to keep everyone informed to what you see and what the data speaks and says on its own, without you necessarily having to interpret, too terribly much. So thanks for what you're doing. If y'all enjoyed this, let us know, give us some feedback, ask some questions.
My pleasure. Good to be here.